Well, things are not always as they seem, of course. I mean, if I object to something about you, it might not be because, I don't like, for argument's sake, the way you swear. But actually, that's not the real reason. I don't like you because you seem to have a lack of some of the values that I have, and have values that are contrary to what I have. And I find that difficult. But I latch on to trivial detail. Namely that you swear. And I don't like swearing, and I take issue with you on that point. But that's not the real reason. The fundamental reason is I'm uneasy with the fact you have different values to me. And they're important to me, and they could well be important to you too, so that we're not good for each other. So, yes, we should be tolerant of people that point out things that we're not in harmony with them on. But at the same time, we should perhaps find out if there's something more fundamental. And if there is, not, scold them or refuse to budge on the issue that they want or something, or compromise even, either. But think very seriously, what's the fundamental difference that is making this surface complaint surface? Because if I'd felt that they had really the same values as me, but for instance, were brought up in a society in which swearing was absolutely normal, I would probably look past much of the swearing as slightly impacting me, but if you like, I know they have a good heart, really, from my point of view, and that's what counts. You see, we need to know what's causing a generosity of experience from them, and what's not. So, is this surface complaint that they're complaining, say, of me, that I had a friend who said I blaspheme? Well, I didn't take this as a compliment, but I thought, well, I don't want to offend him. What's he mean, I blaspheme? And his idea of blasphemy surprised me. It was to take God's name casually. So one doesn't say, oh God, I don't know, with a person like him, because God is very important to him, and that's not taking the name of God earnestly. It's rather in vain and trivially, you see. Oh, I understand it from your point of view. Now look, you're a good friend to me. I don't want to offend you by blaspheming. So I stopped blaspheming, even though I was a totally secular young man. Because I valued this older chap's advice and help, and he was a good person to know. He was in fact the husband of a social worker I worked with, and she was an angel. She worked with the deaf, dumb, blind, and I valued her mission in life in that sense, even though I don't think she was religious either, but only less than he was anyways, certainly. I mean, probably had similar beliefs, or she couldn't have been living with him as far as I could see. And I liked him. He was a great helpful chap from my point of view, and used to help the kids locally, the scruffs in the street, as I saw it, And I was wanting to be a good trainee social worker. I wanted to help in a very secular way, but be a blessing in a very caring way. And I felt these two individuals were quite example to me, helpful, most beneficial indeed. So I was very willing to overrun. I stopped blaspheming as he saw it. And that was probably the first step I made without realizing it in a spiritual right direction, as I would see it now. I wasn't used to holding people in respect. It was more if they were good for me or they weren't, friend or foe. Dad was a foe, according to Mum. According to Mum was a friend. And clearly she was very important in my life, so I followed her view. Not to respect others. Respect was something very questionable to me. You don't want respect, you want love. I still hold that to be true, of course. But respect is very helpful when it comes to civil interaction. And that I probably didn't understand so well. Love is very important when it comes to personal relationship, interaction, fellowship, communion. Is absolutely essential, and without it there is no communion. I had tremendous communion with Mum and almost none with Dad, for obvious reasons, you see, because I didn't trust his relationship, whereas I very much trusted Mum's. But rightly or wrongly, you understand. More or less, I think, rightly. I mean, mother-to-child situation is fairly reliable. There are exceptions that are pretty frightening, but you know. Yeah. Let me pause and review this. Well, I think I'll try and hold it to the basic drift of this recording, which is the role of respect, something that's necessary to civil relationship, society, group behavior, compared to the role of love, which is very much individualistic relationship. Close communion. You're in communion in some sense with family. You're very close. There's tremendous benefit in having family. And the ideal is a great interaction. It's not a formality, it's a loving relationship with some people. Typically man and wife, or parent and child, or perhaps soulmate in another way. It might be between, not necessarily of the opposite sex, a very good friend you've had all your life. And it's not the same as a civil relationship, which is recognizing that people are individual and need their privacy, and we abide by certain rules that they feel is safe and we feel is safe. And incredibly important, therefore, not to have a multicultural society from that perspective. A civil society that's multicultural has tremendous problems because they're not all following the same value system of respect. They're not all respecting in the same way. In a Maori culture, you mustn't interrupt an older person who's talking because of respect. In a modern, secular Western culture, you mustn't interrupt the expert because of respect to his knowledge. Difference, you see. It's different. And the expert would cut across the older person and say, no, that's not actually right. I'm the expert in this field and you must defer to me. In a sense, that's what he's saying. Or if he does defer, he just thinks, well, this is a bit of a stupid society from his point of view, because this is not going to get us anywhere. We need to keep up to date. We need to understand what's happening here, and this view is outdated. It needs to be interrupted. It would be taken by the traditional society as a terrible impertinence and arrogance, and must be dealt with, must be put right. So multiculturalism raises problems. There's not just one variety of secular culture. There's a potential infinite variety, just as there's a potential infinite variety of traditional cultures too, although we might broadly classify each according to secular or religious, with some useful pragmatic success in doing so, validly. I've digressed again, haven't I? Respect seems to be something to do with society's civility, and love seems to be something to do with almost nuclear, very important, specific relationships with one or two individuals that really are very important to us. So if I think of something like the Scythian loyalty of the Central Steppe people, that type of loyalty, it was a tribal loyalty, a civility to the extended family tribe, which civilizations like Persia and proper found, and the Romans found extremely useful. They make good soldiers because they're terribly loyal and brave and fierce, as it turns out, but they're a nightmare when it comes to trying to run a society. So they're very good as a bodyguard. You can integrate them into your society in that way. But, well, they're pretty fierce individuals. You've got to watch your step, how you have them in your society. And they did. They swept in and took over the government at one point, and therefore it was their view of religion, which was more fundamentalist, than the previous administration, which was very Persian, Zoroastrian. Anyway, there were differences. I'm not too clear on it. You need to follow someone like Jessa Rojani in that regard, and he seems to have a better understanding than most, I think, really. Although very controversial, I think, too. think I'm tracking along without really realizing it, the Jesus story view. And I think I should come back to that because I do feel it's so helpful if we don't worship the story. He is treating some people as heathen men, you know. He's even treating his wife as mum differently. He's saying, "Woman, what have I to do with thee?" Which certainly in modern terms is very disrespectful. That's not the way to talk to mum. You know, that's not kind. And I remember my friend at school who became Christian, he said, "No, I don't see Jesus as the epitome of kindness." This shocked me because I assumed Jesus was at the time. And listening to him, and I thought, no, he's right. Jesus doesn't always come across as kind at all. You know, when he's talking to the woman at the well, yes, you could say he's incredibly kind in that he's talking to someone who might normally be ostracized. But in fact, his way of talking is not what we see as kindness in our culture. You know, salvation is of the Jews. You don't know who you're worshipping. We do. I think this is very egocentric. I'm not sure as I can talk to this person. He's a bit of a know-all fundamentalist, isn't he? And of course fundamentalists draw great stock from this sort of approach because they are fundamentalists in leaning. Whereas I look at it and think, I wonder if, how reliable is this story? And of course the academics come up with, it's probably a later insertion. It doesn't look as though it's quite in harmony. It's not in the older versions of the Bible. It's come from somewhere else. And then you think, yes, but it's very usefully come from somewhere else because, well, this is a multicultural thing. This is an outreach to another culture, the Samaritans, and Jesus is not treating them as necessarily alien. He's reaching out and saying that, you know, in some sense they can come in, but they need to clean up their idea of what God is to his idea of what God is. I mean, that's pretty dominant, isn't it? That's not quite my approach, even if I do feel so impressed with the Jesus story. I'm not that impressed. And I think we should have done that with the Old Testament. Yes, I am impressed with God created and so forth, but I'm not impressed with the fact that he felt he had to wipe out everybody but 8 people on the planet in a flood and all the animals with it, other than a few. This is not my God. I'm not happy with this at all. And yet there's a lot in the Old Testament I think it's lovely. You know, don't muzzle the ox. It's not right that he can't feed on. He's surrounded by food and he's hungry. That's not right. There's a loving kindness that speaks to me in that. I think, that's my scripture. You see, we can only worship our own God, the one that personifies what we value. And my goodness, I've nearly covered 20 minutes. I must stop, mustn't I? Perhaps I'll break this one into part D halfway through. Thank you, Heavenly Dad.